Hello, cruel, cruel world. My name is Dr. Shaham Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. You can call me the ominous Shahamanist. Now, this video is about myths that I'm about to dispel, 5 of them about stalkers. I'm also going to discuss a list of celebrities that have stalkers, and I'm going to tell you about a few real life cases, including a real life celebrity stalking story. But I'm also going to talk about stalking broadly, like how common is stalking, who tends to stalk, what's the profile, where it happens, why there's different motivations for different stalkers. So basically, I'm answering who, why, when, where, how, and most importantly, what is that smell? I'm also, as a bonus, going to tell you about an actual real life stalker that I've assessed as a forensic psychiatrist. So I gave it evidence in this man's court case, and I had to decide whether he had a mental illness, whether we should go to hospital or prison, so I'm going to tell you about that. I ask you, can Dr. Grande say that? Not that I'm obsessed with him or anything. Anyway, moving on, cue the intro, here we go. Okay, so let's talk about stalking prevalence. According to a national survey conducted in 2018, around 7.1% of women and 2.6% of men in England and Wales had experienced some form of stalking within the previous year. So that translates to around roughly 1.6 million women and 570,000 men. So it is a massive, massive common problem. Plus, we believe that it's underreported because due to fear, shame, confusion, and even just not understanding what constitutes stalking. Okay, before we get into the myths, my Psych for Sore guys, I've got a question for you, which is about stalking around the world. What proportion of stalking victims and perpetrators do you think are male versus female? And also, what proportion of victims actually know their stalkers? Answers later on and throughout this episode. That's just something for you to perseverate on, to stew on. Okay, myth number 1, stalkers have a profile. Just like licorice all sorts, stalkers come in different shapes and sizes and sexual perversions, and that basically means that they have different motivations. And in fact, you can kind of categorize them on their motivations. So what are the motivations? What are the categories? Well, then you have the rejected stalker, who's usually somebody that's already been in a relationship with the individual, can't accept that they've broken up, and is trying to rekindle their romance. So it's not that their purpose is to try and get back into the relationship, not to hurt or harm or scare or terrorize the victim. Then you've got the resentful stalker, who is kind of the opposite of that. So that's somebody who feels wronged. It doesn't necessarily have to be romantically involved. It could be kind of any motivation. It could be an argument about property, neighbours, for example. And the whole point is to punish the victim. So they're there to scare the victim. Then you have the incompetent suitor, who's somebody that doesn't necessarily know the victim or doesn't know them well, but wants to have a relationship. So they're doing it to start a romance, and in their head it's like a clumsy sort of kind of flirting, so they don't know that they're freaking out the individual. A subsection of that, and the one that I personally am most involved in as a forensic psychiatrist, is erotomania. So that's like a delusional belief that you're already in a relationship with that person. That's going to pop out a few times, that term erotomania, in this episode, so keep an eye out for it. And then finally, probably the most dangerous type of stalker is the predatory stalker. So this is somebody who literally gets off on intimidating and seeing the fear and terror in their victims. They might have the intention to kind of to prowl after them and to sexually assault them. So those are the most kind of dangerous type, predatory. Just as a quick side note, I've actually been on ITV's This Morning, live on TV, to talk about exactly this, a case of a stalker. So the very brave woman called Jennifer came on with me. She was the victim of a stalker. Her stalker had been to prison 3 times, yet he had not changed his stalking behaviour. So we talk about the psychology behind all of that. And yes, that was kind of a humble brag about me being on ITV's This Morning. But I'll put the link in the description and you can go check out that video. Okay, myth number 2 about stalkers is that stalking is mostly celebrities and they're mostly stalked by fans. So people assume that having a stalker is almost like a status symbol for fame. It's like, having a private jet or being invited to the Oscars or sleeping with Kim Kardashian. But in reality, most stalking victims are regular people and they know they're stalkers. In fact, going back to one of the questions I asked you before, about 80 to 90% of the time, the victims know they're stalkers. So they could be like ex-partners, obviously I've said is common, could be co-workers, could be acquaintances, could even be family members. So I asked you to get the proportion. If you got within 5%, buy yourself a cookie and send me the bill. If you got it exactly right, buy yourself a Tesla and you can bill Dr. Grande. Okay, speaking of celebrities being stalked and completely ignoring the fact that I said that it was very rare, I'm about to tell you a real life story of a celebrity being stalked that's kind of very shocking, to be honest. So this is about David Letterman. He is a late night talk show host, or I think he's retired now. He was stalked by a woman named Peggy Ray in the late 80s and the early 90s. And it all began when she stole Letterman's Porsche and she was arrested at a toll booth, and she claimed that she was Letterman's wife and she had her son in the back. And this is the bit that's kind of a little bit crazy, is I think she actually believed that. So she delusionally thought that she was in a relationship with him, even though they had not even met at that point. And then over the next several years, Ray trespassed onto Letterman's property multiple times. She entered the house several times. She would leave items behind. In fact, Letterman even occasionally joked about this on the show, which I think ironically gave her more attention, which kind of kept her behaviours going. Ray's exact motivations remain unclear, although she seemed fixated on having a relationship with him, and her behaviour escalated. She was arrested several times. She obviously took heed of the well-known idiom, "The way to a man's heart is through utter terror and persistence." After Letterman, she eventually she went on to stalk somebody else, the retired astronaut whose name is Story Musgrave. I know it sounds like I made it up, but that's literally his name. Fortunately, this story has a tragic ending because in 1998, at the age of 46, Margaret Mary Ray died by taking her own life. She knelt in front of an oncoming train in Colorado. That is not a happy ending, let's put it that way. Okay, myth number 3 about stalkers. The best way to deal with stalkers is to ignore them. So just like that gonorrhea that you got in your second year at university, ignoring the problem will not make it go away. Having said all that, it kind of depends on the reasons and the motivations of the stalker in the first place. So for example, somebody with erotomania, so that's a delusional belief that they're in a relationship, they might have other psychotic symptoms. So for example, I've seen people with a delusion of reference. So they believe that something on the TV that's not about them is like a secret coded message to them. So what I'm saying is ignoring them won't make a difference because they might be getting their encouragement or their messages from a delusional source that you can't control. This kind of person, it might actually need to be escalated for medication, maybe even hospitalization. Then there is the resentful stalker. So they're already aggrieved. They already feel wronged. So if you ignore them, it could actually make them even more angry so it can continue their behavior. But if you have somebody like an intimacy seeker, although they might be transfixed on the original victim for a while, they might eventually get the message because they're basically looking for any kind of relationship. So they'll move on to another target, which is not great for the other target, but it solves the problem. So it can help sometimes. But the best way to deal with a stalker, obviously, is to get the police involved. There's other tips that I could give you, such as informing your friends and your colleagues so that they're aware of the stalker so they can challenge him or her. I won't go into it all now, but I've actually got a video on exactly this. Always be plugging my tips on how to deal with a stalker. In that video, there's also some content of me talking about a good friend of mine, Isla Traquois, who herself was a victim of stalking. We went on live TV to talk about it all. Again, bit of a humble brag, but I will put the descriptions in the link if you want to know about that and if you want to know the tips about stalking. Okay, quick break. Let's have a list of celebrities who've been stalked. And I'm not talking about, trolls on the internet. I'm talking about actual, factual, genuine, schmenuine. I mean, turning up at their house, potentially carrying a knife, potentially in danger kind of stalking. Here are some celebrities. There are Selena Gomez. So in 2014, there was a break-in and a man was arrested after breaking into a home in the Hollywood Hills. Fortunately, Selena was not at home at the time. Bit unlucky for her, there was another man was arrested in 2017 after entering Selena's guest house whilst she was home, and then a friend confronted the intruder who fled the scene. Another celebrity who's had a stalker is Sandra Bullock. So a stalker broke into her home in 2014 when her son was present. Obviously, kids involved there, that's not funny. Sandra Bullock, the star of Mrs. Congeniality 2, Armed and Fabulous 2005, also not funny. Then there's Gwyneth Paltrow. So she was stalked for over a decade by a man who sent her letters, threatened violence. So this man obviously couldn't even be kept at bay with forcibly inserting a vaginal jade egg, or having a psychic vampire repellent spray, or a coffee enema. No, I'm not making those things up. Those are actually things promoted by Gwyneth Paltrow on Goop or Gloop or Grope or whatever its backpack ciphering name is, whatever that website was called. So look, I'm not here to judge. If you want to put eggs up your vagine to purify it, do whatever you want to do. Just please wash your hands. Remind me not to have breakfast at your house. Okay, moving on. Myth number 4, all stalking is IRL. If you know what IRL is, then get with the program, grandma. No, I'm just kidding. IRL means in real life. So cyber stalking is a real and growing problem. Stalkers can use social media, they use email and other online platforms to kind of harass and intimidate their victims. And unbeknownst to the public, or a common misconception, or commonly unknown, is that cyber stalking is actually more prevalent than traditional in-person stalking, especially in some countries. So for example, in the USA, an estimated 1.5 million people who are 16 years of older, so that's about 0.6% of the US population, were cyber stalked in 2019 alone, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, otherwise known as the BJS. So I suppose when you're talking about cyber stalking, the counter argument is that you can kind of switch off social media, right? But the counter argument is that the victim might have an online presence or an identity that's very much tied in to their social media, and they might have spent years building up their profile. So why should they have to, shut down or back off? They could be a handsome gold-tooth psychiatrist who's made videos for 3 years and hardly got 60,000 subs, even though he's put in blood, sweat and tears and at least one other bodily fluid. And yet some of you haven't subscribed. And also the younger generation might miss out, because the younger generation, they might have much of their identity which actually is about their social media presence. So you will understand this, grandma, because you don't even know what IRL means, which when I heard that made me ROFL. Is that the term? I don't know what I'm talking about. So what I'm saying is it's not fair if some people are socially excluded if they're forced offline. Now the counter argument might be that, well, slagging you off on social media might hurt your feelings, but you're not physically in danger. Your bunny is safe. It's not going to be boiled. But the counter argument of that is that this can be the first step towards actual stalking IRL. So for example, a stalker on the internet could piece together your address or your place of work through your social media posts, through you flexing on Instagram. And then the counter argument is, I think we're arguing too much. How about a truce? Okay, so I wanted to make this episode a bit more profound. So here's a quick, famous poem about stalking. I think it was Keats that said, "So I can relate to what you're saying in your song. So when I have a shitty day, I drift away and put them on. Because I don't really got shit else, so that shit helps when I'm depressed. I even got a tattoo of your name across your chest. Sometimes I even cut myself to see how much it bleeds. It's like adrenaline. The pain is such a rush for me." Okay, sorry, moving on. Myth number 5, stalkers will stop once they've been caught. Okay, I'm going to do this myth, then I'm going to tell you about my real life case of stalking that I dealt with personally. Before I do that, I'm going to introduce you to this channel. Schmack for Sure Minds, I deal with a plethora of issues related to offending, mental illness, and the crossover between the two. I'll be doing these debunked videos recently, so go check out my restraining orders debunked, what you did and didn't know, murderers, female prisons, all that good-ish. Go chickadee, check it out. I implore you to subscribe, implore you. Not only does it help me out tremendously, but it substantially decreases the number of temporary traffic lights around you and your ends. I know it's getting very frustrated. You've been late to work 3 times last month. That shit's not cool. Okay, myth number 5, stalkers will stop once they've been caught. We all know that saying, once bitten, twice high. But the stats on stalking and reoffending is actually quite variable. So studies show a wide range. Some researchers say that recidivism, which is a fancy word of reoffending for stalkers, is anywhere between 22% and 56%. So in fact, data from the Stalking Threat Assessment Center, known as STAC, not to be confused with the STAC Shrivel Testicle Annual Conference, who, by the way, left a message saying that you're fully signed up for the Golden Flake package, so congratulations. The STAC indicates a 22% reoffending rate within 18 months, even after the stalkers had completed a specific intervention program. So what I'm trying to say is the the recidivism rates are actually quite high. And factors that can increase reoffending, that can increase recidivism for stalkers are things like mental health issues, substance use problems, that's very common, and a lack of employment opportunities. Okay, moving on. We're coming to the home stretch. You can do it, get your back into it. I can do it, get your ass into it. I'm going to actually tell you about a real life patient that I've said. So I've anonymized his identity. I've changed details. I'm using a fake name of Mr. O'Shea. But I wanted to tell you about this case because it gives you an insight into what I do for a living as a forensic psychiatrist. And also I think it's an interesting case because it's directly related to mental illness. Very rare in overall within stalkers, but it's what I deal with. So there's this man who was being investigated about stalking a cafe worker. And during the investigation, the police officer that he was in contact with, a female officer, he became attracted to her and he sent her about 150 emails declaring his love. So the perpetrator, Mr. O'Shea, told me that initially this woman didn't reply, but she didn't block his emails initially, she did eventually. So he took this as an indirect kind of message from the victim to him that he should continue and that she was trying to she wanted a relationship but hiding it from his husband. So obviously these are very delusional beliefs. So I kind of, just to test the waters and to test him during my psychiatric assessment, I suggested that it could be intimidating and distressing for the victim. And I also I asked why he thought that she eventually blocked him. And he said in his warped mind that it wasn't intimidating and she eventually blocked him because it was like her way of flirting and playing hard to get. So basically what I'm saying is no matter what she did, he had delusional beliefs that encouraged him to keep going. So I listed these delusional beliefs in my assessment and I decided that he had a diagnosis of erotomania. Now I've mentioned this word erotomania. It might sound like a theme park for porn stars, but actually it is where somebody is so transfixed that they believe that they have a relationship with that person. It's a delusional psychotic belief. It will never go away unless you actually treat it with antipsychotics, and even then the success rate is actually quite low. So in this particular assessment for Mr. O'Shea, he also had some other delusional beliefs. So he genuinely believed that he created an app which could cure like the chemical imbalance of depression. So he believed that he cured depression, and he hadn't worked in years, and he reckoned that the reason he couldn't get like an ordinary job in like Tesco's or whatever is because the pharma companies who sold antidepressants were so jealous and they were trying to shut him down because they didn't want him to release this app. So basically what I'm saying is that he had lots of bizarre beliefs, delusional beliefs, which made it easier for me to diagnose that he had schizoaffective disorder, he was psychotic, and erotomania on top of that. It's a brief summary of what happened. Mr. O'Shea lied to me, so he told me the false and the court a false home address, and he said he had no psychiatric diagnosis. But we did some digging, and it turned out that he was already tied in with the community mental health team, so he already had a psychiatrist, but he hadn't been taking his medication. And I did a background check. He already had a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder. I spoke to his care coordinator, which is like the nurse in the community who looks after him. She said that he'd not had his medication in years. So the good news is that there was already a system in place to look after him. He just needed to tie back in with that system. He needed to take his medications to stop these delusional beliefs. So my evidence in court was that he needed a community order, and one of the conditions of the community order, which is like a contract, is that he had to take his medications. So if he didn't do this, if he stopped doing this, then he could be sent to prison. So luckily for me in this case, the opposing barrister was actually quite sensible. I think the opposing barrister, even though their job for the defense barrister is to get the best outcome from the patient, he realized, the opposing barrister, that the best outcome wasn't for him to be released or to be most liberal or to fight against my suggestion of community order, but actually the best outcome for him was to be psychiatrically treated. So there's no objection from them, so the judge agreed. What's interesting, I think, about this case is had Mr. O'Shea done it for a bit longer, or if he'd turned up to the police officer's house, which I think he was planning to do, or if there's any kind of threats of violence, he probably would have got a hospital order and he probably would have actually been like psychiatrically sectioned. By the way, a bit random, but I've actually got a video on a man who threatened to stalk me. He actually was threatening to damage my reputation and my career. I'm not going to go into it now because I don't have enough time. I'm too busy rescuing old people from trees and helping cats across the road. But if you're interested, I'll put the links in the section. Okay, almost at the end. I asked you guys, my Psych for Soul guys, stalking victims, what proportion are male and female? So around 78% of stalking victims in the world are female. And the perpetrators are overwhelmingly likely to be male, so around 87% of perpetrators are male. So let's summarize what we've learnt in this session. Stalkers don't have a typical profile. There's lots of different motivations. Today, cyber stalking is actually more prevalent than traditional in-person stalking. Gwyneth Paltrow literally sells vaginal jeg aids and psychic vampire repellent spray. Stalkers often won't stop once they've been caught or warned, depending on their motivations. Miss Congeniality 2 was shit. Nobody saw that one coming. And David Letterman was stalked relentlessly in the late 1980s, early 1990s. Okay, that's enough from me. Have a blessed day. Hope you enjoyed the video. Subscribe and please let your friends know about my content. And do not forget, I love you.